She didn't flinch when they cranked the pressure device to maximum settings. Didn't cry out when the metal pressed against her nerve points, with enough force to make grown men weep. Just sat there with steady breathing while the digital readout climbed higher than the instructors had ever seen. Her dark eyes focused on something beyond the sterile walls of the testing room. The academy staff exchanged glances, uncertain whether their equipment was malfunctioning or if they were witnessing something extraordinary. But when they checked her medical file afterward, when they saw what was written in those classified sections that most people never access, everything changed. Because Rebecca Martinez wasn't just another volunteer helping with recruit evaluations, she was something else entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Colorado morning air cut sharp and clean through the valley as I pulled my Honda Civic through the gates of Riverside Police Training Academy. 6:15 in the morning, and the sun was just starting to paint the peaks of the Rockies in shades of gold and amber. The security guard waved me through with barely a glance at my volunteer credentials, probably assuming I was just another civilian helper here to assist with the quarterly recruit assessments. In a way, he was right. In other ways, he had no idea what he was looking at. I parked in the visitor section near the main building, a sprawling concrete structure that looked more like a fortress than a training facility. The architecture was all sharp angles and bulletproof glass, designed to intimidate as much as educate. Through the tinted windows, I could see the silhouettes of new recruits already gathering in the main hall, their nervous energy visible even from a distance. Fresh faces full of determination and fear in equal measure, probably wondering if they had what it took to make it through the next 8 hours of psychological and physical evaluation. My reflection in the car's side mirror showed a woman who looked ordinary enough. 28 years old, shoulder-length black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, minimal makeup, because there was no point in pretending this was anything other than a working day. I wore simple, athletic clothing, gray leggings and a black moisture-wicking shirt, nothing that would draw attention or suggest I was anything more than a civilian volunteer. The only unusual thing about my appearance was how completely relaxed I looked, considering where I was about to spend my day. Most people would be nervous about voluntarily subjecting themselves to police academy stress testing. Most people would have second thoughts about letting trainee officers practice their psychological evaluation techniques on them. Most people would wonder what kind of person volunteers to be a test subject for pain tolerance assessments. But most people hadn't spent 3 years working as a paramedic in downtown Denver, pulling broken bodies from car wrecks and talking suicide jumpers off bridges while maintaining the kind of calm that keeps everyone else functional. I grabbed my water bottle and the folder containing my volunteer paperwork from the passenger seat. The morning air hit my lungs like a cold blessing as I stepped out of the car, carrying with it the scent of pine trees and distant snow. Somewhere behind the main building, I could hear the rhythmic sound of physical training already in progress. Drill instructors barking commands while recruits pushed their bodies to discover their limits. It was a familiar symphony, one that reminded me of my own training days in a different context, when learning to manage pain and stress wasn't optional but survival. The lobby of the academy was all polished concrete floors and fluorescent lighting, with motivational posters covering the walls. Images of officers in action, quotes about courage and service, statistics about crime reduction that were meant to inspire new recruits to push through the difficult moments ahead. Behind the reception desk sat Officer Daniels, a man in his 40s with the kind of permanent scowl that suggested he'd seen too many hopeful recruits wash out to maintain much optimism about human potential. He looked up from his computer screen as I approached, his expression shifting from boredom to mild irritation. The nameplate on his desk read, Officer R. Daniels in block letters, and beside it sat a coffee mug with a faded department logo and ring stains that spoke of countless early mornings just like this one. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air, mixing with the antiseptic scent of industrial floor cleaner, and creating the particular atmosphere of government buildings everywhere. Morning, I said, placing my folder on the counter between us. Rebecca Martinez, I'm here for the Volunteer Evaluation Assistance Program. Daniels took the folder with the kind of resigned efficiency that suggested this was just another item on a long list of morning tasks. He flipped through the pages with practiced disinterest, his eyes scanning the forms without really seeing them. Behind him, I could see Ms. Patricia Wells, the admin coordinator, sorting through files with the methodical precision of someone who had been doing the same job for decades. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing, though she seemed content to let Daniels handle the front desk interactions. "Says here you're cleared for psychological stress evaluation and physical tolerance testing," Daniels said, looking up at me with something that might have been surprise. "You sure about that? Some of these assessments can get pretty intense." I nodded once, keeping my expression neutral. "I understand what's involved." Wells glanced over from her filing, her attention caught by something in our conversation. "Honey, you might want to reconsider the physical tolerance portion," she said, not bothering to hide the skepticism in her voice. "We had a former Marine wash out of that evaluation last month. Grown man, combat veteran, and he was crying by the time we got to level 6. "I appreciate the concern," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "But I'd like to proceed as scheduled." Daniel shrugged and turned back to his computer, clicking through screens with the air of a man who had learned not to argue with people's poor decisions. "Your call. Just need to verify your medical clearance and liability waivers." He pulled up what I assumed was my file, his eyebrows raising slightly as he scrolled through the information. "Medical assessment shows you're cleared for extreme stress testing. Psychological evaluation indicates high resilience markers. Previous experience includes emergency medical services." Wells walked over to join him behind the counter, her curiosity apparently getting the better of her professional disinterest. She peered at the screen over Daniel's shoulder, her expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching concern. "EMT work is one thing, dear, but what we do here is specifically designed to break people down. It's not about helping others, it's about testing your own limits." "I understand the difference," I said quietly. The truth was, I understood it better than they could possibly imagine. I'd spent 3 years running towards situations that made other people run away, maintaining composure while everything around me fell apart. I'd held pressure on arterial bleeds while trapped victims screamed, performed CPR on children while their parents begged me to save them, talked people back from the edge of buildings while my own heart hammered against my ribs. But this wasn't about proving anything to them or to myself. This was about something else entirely. Daniels printed out a visitor badge and slid it across the counter, along with a small packet of information. "Report to the main gymnasium at 700 hours. Sergeant Thompson will be running the physical evaluations today. Fair warning, he doesn't go easy on volunteers just because they're not recruits." I clipped the badge to my shirt and tucked the information packet into my back pocket. Through the lobby windows, I could see more cars arriving in the parking lot, family members dropping off nervous recruits for what might be the most challenging day of their lives so far. Some of them lingered by their vehicles, sharing last-minute words of encouragement or concern. Others drove away quickly, as if staying might somehow jinx the process. "One more thing," Wells said as I turned to leave. "If you change your mind at any point during the testing, just say the word. There's no shame in recognizing your limits. Better to walk away intact than to push through and end up needing medical attention." I nodded my thanks and headed toward the corridor that led to the gymnasium, my footsteps echoing off the polished concrete floors. The hallways were lined with photographs of graduating classes going back decades, hundreds of faces frozen in moments of pride and accomplishment. Some of those officers were probably still on the force, others had moved on to different careers or retirement. A few had undoubtedly given their lives in service to their communities. Each photograph represented someone who had made it through days like today, who had proven they could handle whatever the academy threw at them. The gymnasium was a vast space with high ceilings and walls lined with exercise equipment that looked more like medieval torture devices than training tools. Recruits were already gathering in small groups, their voices creating a low buzz of nervous conversation. Most of them looked young, probably fresh out of college or the military, with the kind of eager determination that hadn't been tested by real adversity yet. A few were older, career changers who had decided that law enforcement was their calling after years in other professions. Sergeant Thompson stood at the center of the room like a monument to physical fitness and mental toughness. He was a man in his early 50s who looked like he could still outrun and outfight recruits half his age, with graying hair cut military short and the kind of bearing that commanded immediate respect. His voice carried across the gymnasium without effort as he addressed the assembled group, explaining the day's procedures with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Today's evaluations are designed to test your psychological resilience and physical pain tolerance under controlled conditions, he announced, his eyes scanning the crowd with the practiced assessment of an experienced instructor. These are not competitions. You are not trying to outperform each other. You are trying to demonstrate that you can maintain composure and decision-making ability when your body and mind are under extreme stress. I found a spot near the back of the group, trying to blend in with the recruits despite the obvious differences in our circumstances. They were here to prove themselves worthy of a career that would define the rest of their lives. I was here for reasons that went deeper than career advancement, reasons that had to do with understanding my own capabilities and perhaps helping others understand theirs. Thompson's gaze found me in the crowd, and his expression shifted slightly as he processed my presence. We also have a volunteer with us today who will be participating in the evaluation process. Ms. Martinez has generously agreed to serve as a baseline comparison for our stress testing protocols. His tone was professional but carried an undertone of curiosity, as if he wasn't entirely sure what to make of a civilian volunteer willing to subject herself to academy-level stress testing. One of the recruits, a young man with the nervous energy of someone trying too hard to appear confident, raised his hand. "Sergeant, what kind of experience does the volunteer have? Are we supposed to perform better or worse than a civilian?" Thompson's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "The volunteer's background is her own business, recruit. Your job is to focus on your own performance and demonstrate that preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Have what it takes to serve your community. Comparison with others is a luxury you won't have on the street." The next hour passed in a blur of preliminary assessments and equipment familiarization. We moved through stations designed to test different aspects of psychological and physical resilience, each one administered by instructors who maintained the kind of professional detachment that allowed them to push people to their breaking points without taking it personally. Heart rate monitors were attached, baseline measurements were taken, and consent forms were signed with the kind of bureaucratic thoroughness that protected the academy from liability while ensuring participants understood exactly what they were volunteering for. The first real test was psychological stress evaluation, conducted in a small room with white walls and industrial carpet that seemed designed to create an atmosphere of clinical detachment. The instructor, a woman in her 30s with the calm demeanor of someone trained in crisis intervention, explained that we would be subjected to loud noises, flashing lights, and verbal stress while attempting to complete simple cognitive tasks. The goal was to measure how quickly our decision-making abilities degraded under pressure. I watched several recruits go through the process before my turn, noting how their performance varied wildly based on their previous experience and natural temperament. Some maintained remarkable composure, completing their tasks with only minor increases in completion time. Others struggled visibly, their hands shaking as they tried to sort colored blocks while sirens wailed and strobe lights flashed around them. One young woman emerged from the room in tears, not from shame, but from the sheer intensity of discovering her own limits in such a controlled environment. When my turn came, I settled into the chair with the same calm I'd learned to maintain during three-car pileups and domestic violence calls. The instructor attached sensors to monitor my heart rate and stress responses, explaining once more what I could expect over the next 15 minutes. As the test began and chaos erupted around me, I found myself drawing on years of experience maintaining focus while sirens screamed and radios crackled with urgent communications. The colored blocks sorted themselves into neat piles while my pulse remained steady and my breathing stayed controlled. The instructor checked her readings twice, frowning at the displays as if they might be malfunctioning. My stress markers barely registered above baseline levels, despite the sensory assault designed to overwhelm most people's coping mechanisms. When the test ended and the room fell silent, she looked at me with undisguised curiosity. "Interesting results," she said, making notes on her clipboard. "Very interesting." But it was the physical tolerance testing that would really set me apart from the other participants. The equipment looked innocuous enough, sophisticated devices designed to apply controlled pressure to specific nerve points while monitoring subjects' responses. The goal wasn't to cause injury but to measure pain tolerance and the ability to maintain cognitive function while experiencing significant discomfort. It was the kind of testing that separated people who thought they were tough from people who actually were. I waited my turn while recruit after recruit discovered their limits in ways that were both humbling and enlightening. Some lasted longer than others, but all of them eventually reached the point where their body's survival instincts overrode their conscious determination to continue. The sounds of distress echoed from the testing room, followed by periods of recovery and debriefing designed to help participants process what they had just experienced. When Sergeant Thompson called my name, I walked into the room with the same measured calm I'd maintained all morning. The testing apparatus looked like something from a medical facility, all chrome and digital displays and precise calibration controls. 2 technicians monitored the equipment while Thompson himself prepared to oversee my evaluation, his expression betraying nothing of his expectations. "Standard protocol," he explained as I settled into the testing chair. "We'll start at level 1 and increase pressure gradually. At any point, you can signal to stop, and the test will end immediately. The goal is to find your tolerance threshold, not to cause unnecessary suffering." I nodded my understanding and placed my arm in the device, feeling the cool touch of metal against my skin. The first few levels were barely noticeable, designed more to establish baseline readings than to cause any real discomfort. Around level 4, I could feel the pressure beginning to register, as something my nervous system wanted to avoid. By level 6, the discomfort was becoming genuine pain, the kind that would make most people start considering their options. But something strange happened as the test continued. Instead of the escalating distress that the equipment was designed to measure, I found myself settling deeper into the kind of focused calm that had carried me through my worst days as a paramedic. My breathing remained steady, my heart rate stayed within normal parameters, and my cognitive responses to the simple questions they asked remained sharp and clear. The pain was there, real and measurable, but it seemed to exist in a separate space from my conscious awareness, like background noise that I could acknowledge without allowing it to affect my performance. Level 8. Level 9. The technicians began glancing at each other with expressions of growing confusion. Their equipment was functioning perfectly, registering pain levels that should have been unbearable. But my physiological responses suggested something that didn't match their previous experience with test subjects. Thompson's professional demeanor began to crack slightly, replaced by the kind of focused attention that meant he was witnessing something unusual. Level 10. Maximum pressure. The device was applying force that had made veteran officers call for mercy, that had sent former combat soldiers into near-panic responses. But I sat there with steady breathing and clear eyes, answering their questions about basic math and memory recall as if I was sitting in a comfortable chair rather than experiencing what their instruments said should be excruciating pain. The technicians checked their equipment twice, running diagnostic protocols to ensure everything was functioning correctly. The readings were accurate, the pressure was genuine, but my responses defied everything they thought they knew about human pain tolerance and stress management. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes at maximum pressure, Thompson finally signaled for the test to end. As the pressure released and sensation returned to normal, I flexed my fingers and rotated my shoulders with the casual ease of someone finishing a routine exercise. The room had fallen completely silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sounds of training activities elsewhere in the building. The technicians stared at their readouts with expressions of scientific bewilderment, while Thompson looked at me with something approaching awe. "Well," he said finally, his voice carrying a note of professional confusion that he was clearly not accustomed to experiencing. That was unexpected. One of the technicians, a young man who looked like he'd probably tested hundreds of recruits, shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen readings like this. Pain tolerance off the charts. Stress response is minimal. Cognitive function actually improved under pressure. It's like the discomfort was helping her focus instead of hindering it." Thompson made notes on his clipboard, but his eyes kept returning to me as if I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Where did you say you developed this kind of tolerance?" "EMT work," I replied simply, though we all knew that explanation wasn't sufficient to account for what they'd just witnessed. Emergency medical training might develop psychological resilience and the ability to function under pressure, but it didn't typically create the kind of superhuman pain tolerance their equipment had just measured. As I left the testing room and rejoined the group of recruits waiting for their own evaluations, I could feel their curious stares following me. Word had already begun to spread about the volunteer, who had maxed out the pain tolerance equipment without breaking a sweat. Some looked at me with admiration, others with the kind of suspicion reserved for people whose capabilities don't match their appearance. But most just looked confused, trying to reconcile the ordinary-looking woman in athletic clothes with whatever they'd heard about my performance on the tests. The morning continued with additional evaluations, each one designed to probe different aspects of psychological and physical resilience. Combat simulation exercises where participants had to make tactical decisions while under simulated gunfire. Crisis negotiation scenarios where clear communication had to be maintained while dealing with unstable individuals. Emergency medical response training, where life-saving procedures had to be performed under extreme time pressure. In each case, I found myself drawing on experiences and capabilities that went deeper than my official background suggested. The crisis negotiation felt familiar because I'd talked people through their worst moments while working accident scenes. The emergency medical procedures were second nature because I'd performed them under conditions far worse than any training simulation could replicate. And the combat scenarios felt manageable because I'd learned to maintain calm decision-making while surrounded by chaos and danger. But it was during the lunch break, as recruits shared stories and compared their experiences, that I began to understand how my performance was being perceived by the academy staff. Conversations stopped when I walked past groups of instructors. Clipboards were consulted and heads shaken in apparent disbelief. Phone calls were made with voices too low to overhear, but body language that suggested something significant was being discussed. I found a quiet spot outside the building where I could eat my sandwich and watch the mountains rise against the afternoon sky. The peaks were sharp and unforgiving, carved by wind and weather into shapes that spoke of endurance and resilience. They had witnessed countless human struggles over the millennia, standing as silent testimony to the fact that some things endure regardless of the temporary challenges that surround them. My phone buzzed with a text from my former supervisor at the ambulance service, asking how the academy evaluation was going. I typed back a simple response about interesting training exercises and helpful instructors, not mentioning the confused looks and whispered conversations that had been following me all morning. There would be time later to process what had happened today, to understand why my responses to their tests had been so different from what they expected. For now, it was enough to sit in the mountain air and prepare for whatever the afternoon might bring. Because something told me that the real challenges of this day were still ahead, and that my unusual performance on the morning evaluations was going to attract attention I hadn't necessarily been seeking. But that was a problem for the afternoon version of myself to handle. The lunch break version just wanted to finish her sandwich and enjoy a few minutes of peace before diving back into the controlled chaos of police academy stress testing. The afternoon sun was climbing higher, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sounds of new recruits discovering their own limits and capabilities. It was the sound of people finding out who they really were when everything comfortable and familiar was stripped away. And tomorrow, if I was lucky, I'd have the chance to help them understand what they'd learned about themselves today. The afternoon session began with a different energy than the morning evaluations. Word had clearly traveled through the academy's communication channels because when I returned to the gymnasium, I noticed instructors positioned at strategic points around the room, their attention focused with the kind of intensity usually reserved for official assessments rather than routine volunteer demonstrations. Captain Rodriguez had joined the observation team, a woman in her late 40s whose reputation for identifying exceptional candidates was legendary among academy staff. She stood near the advanced testing equipment with arms folded, studying me with the analytical gaze of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. Sergeant Thompson approached with a clipboard and an expression that suggested the afternoon's agenda had been modified since lunch. Behind him walked Dr. Sarah Chen, the academy's consulting psychologist, a woman whose presence indicated that my morning performance had triggered protocols typically reserved for unusual circumstances. Dr. Chen carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to analyzing human behavior under extreme conditions, her dark hair pulled back in a professional style that framed intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Martinez," Thompson said, his tone carrying a formality that hadn't been present during the morning session. "We'd like to run some additional evaluations this afternoon if you're willing. Dr. Chen has some specialized assessments that might help us better understand your response patterns." I nodded my agreement, though something in the atmosphere had shifted since lunch. The casual dynamic of volunteer assistance had evolved into something more focused, more purposeful. The recruits seemed to sense it too, Their nervous energy, now mixed with curiosity about why a civilian volunteer was receiving such concentrated attention from senior academy personnel. Dr. Chen stepped forward with the kind of measured approach that suggested extensive experience in dealing with subjects whose capabilities fell outside normal parameters. Rebecca. The results from this morning's evaluations were quite remarkable. I'd like to explore some additional scenarios that might help us understand the psychological mechanisms behind your stress responses. The way she phrased it was carefully neutral, professionally curious rather than alarmed or suspicious. But I caught the undercurrent of scientific fascination that drove researchers when they encountered data that didn't fit established models. My morning performance hadn't just been impressive, it had been anomalous enough to warrant bringing in specialized personnel for further investigation. What kind of additional scenarios? I asked, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had carried me through the morning's challenges. Cognitive load testing under physical stress, Dr. Chen explained, consulting her tablet with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been analyzing my earlier results during the lunch break. We want to see how your decision-making processes function when multiple stressors are applied simultaneously. Most people experience significant degradation in analytical thinking when pain levels reach the threshold you maintained this morning. Captain Rodriguez joined our conversation, her presence adding another layer of official attention that made the recruits glance over with increased curiosity. She was a compact woman with graying hair and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of evaluating human potential under pressure. Her uniform bore ribbons that spoke of distinguished service, and she carried herself with the authority of someone whose assessments could make or break careers. "Ms. Martinez," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism of senior law enforcement, "I've been reviewing your volunteer application and medical clearance documentation. Your background shows EMT certification and emergency services experience, but those qualifications don't typically prepare someone for the kind of performance we observed this morning." There was no accusation in her tone, but there was clearly an expectation of further explanation. I found myself in the interesting position of being questioned about capabilities I'd never fully understood myself, asked to account for responses that seemed as natural to me as breathing but apparently struck trained professionals as extraordinary. Emergency medical work involves managing high-stress situations while maintaining functional decision-making, I replied carefully. Perhaps that experience translated better to your testing environment than expected. Dr. Chen made notes on her tablet, her expression thoughtful but skeptical. The stress tolerance levels we measured this morning fall into ranges typically associated with specialized military training or extensive conditioning programs. EMT work, while certainly demanding, doesn't usually produce the kind of pain tolerance thresholds we documented. The conversation was becoming increasingly clinical, and I realized that my afternoon was going to involve far more scrutiny than I'd anticipated when I'd volunteered for recruit evaluation assistance. The casual atmosphere of the morning had given way to something that felt more like a research study, with me as the primary subject of investigation. Thompson consulted his own notes, cross-referencing information with the kind of methodical attention that suggested protocols were being followed. "We'd like to expand the testing parameters this afternoon, with your permission. Dr. Chen has developed some scenarios that combine physical stress with complex problem-solving requirements. The goal is to understand how your cognitive abilities function under conditions that typically overwhelm most people's processing capacity." I agreed to the expanded testing, though I was beginning to understand that my volunteer day was evolving into something more significant than anyone had initially planned. The recruits were directed to other training activities, while specialized equipment was prepared for what Dr. Chen termed advanced stress response evaluation. The gymnasium gradually emptied of its earlier crowd, leaving me with a team of academy personnel whose professional interest had clearly been sparked by my morning performance. The first expanded test involved mathematical problem-solving, while subjected to increasing levels of physical discomfort. I was positioned at a computer terminal with sensors attached to monitor my physiological responses, while nearby equipment prepared to apply controlled stress to pressure points throughout my nervous system. The problems started simple, basic arithmetic and pattern recognition, then progressed to complex calculations and logical reasoning that would challenge anyone under optimal conditions. As the physical stress began to build, I found myself settling into the same focused state that had carried me through my most challenging emergency calls. The discomfort registered clearly in my consciousness, but it seemed to exist in a separate space from the cognitive processes required to solve the mathematical problems. If anything, the physical stress appeared to sharpen my mental focus, creating a kind of tunnel vision that eliminated distractions and allowed pure concentration on the tasks at hand. Dr. Chen monitored my responses with growing fascination, occasionally consulting with Thompson and Rodriguez as my performance continued to defy their expectations. The pain levels climbed steadily while my accuracy on the cognitive tasks remained consistently high, even improving slightly as the stress increased. By the time we reached maximum pressure settings, I was solving complex geometric proofs and statistical analyses with the same efficiency I'd demonstrated at baseline levels. "Remarkable," Dr. Chen murmured, studying her readouts with the expression of a scientist encountering a phenomenon that challenged established understanding. "Not only is cognitive function maintained under extreme stress, it's actually enhanced. The pain appears to be creating a state of hyper-focus rather than the typical degradation response." Captain Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout the session, her attention divided between my performance and the technical data being generated by Dr. Chen's equipment. When the test concluded and the pressure devices powered down, she approached with the kind of measured steps that suggested important decisions were being weighed. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her tone carrying new respect but also deeper curiosity, "I need to ask you directly, have you received any specialized training beyond your documented EMT certification? Military conditioning, survival programs, pain management therapy, anything that might account for these response patterns?" The question hung in the air with obvious importance, and I realized that my answer would determine how the rest of this afternoon proceeded. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than they probably expected. I'd never received formal training in pain management or stress conditioning, never attended military programs or specialized academies. But my 3 years as a paramedic had exposed me to situations and experiences that most training programs couldn't replicate. "No specialized training beyond emergency medical services," I replied honestly. "But that work involved exposure to extreme situations on a regular basis, multiple fatality accidents, violent crime scenes, medical emergencies where lives depended on maintaining composure under intense pressure." Dr. Chen exchanged glances with Captain Rodriguez, clearly processing my answer against the data they'd collected. Thompson joined their conference, bringing his own perspective from years of training law enforcement recruits and observing how different backgrounds translated to academy performance. "The thing is," Thompson said, his voice carrying the weight of professional experience, "we've tested plenty of EMTs and paramedics over the years. They typically perform well on stress evaluations, better than average on cognitive function under pressure. But what we're seeing here falls into completely different statistical categories." The implication was clear. My responses weren't just better than average. They were beyond the range of normal human variation in ways that suggested factors beyond standard emergency services experience. The afternoon was taking on the atmosphere of a research investigation, with me as the primary subject of scientific curiosity. Dr. Chen returned to her equipment, running additional diagnostic checks to ensure the accuracy of her measurements. "I'd like to try one more evaluation," she said, "something that combines physical stress with emotional pressure. Most people find it significantly more challenging when psychological factors are added to physical discomfort." The new test involved reviewing video footage of emergency scenarios while subjected to the same pressure point stimulation that had been used in previous evaluations. The videos showed actual emergency situations, medical crises and accident scenes that required rapid assessment and decision-making under intense time pressure. My task was to analyze each scenario and provide detailed response protocols while managing increasing levels of physical discomfort. As the videos played and the pressure mounted, I found myself drawing on memories and experiences that went deeper than formal training. 3 years of emergency response work had exposed me to human suffering and crisis situations that most people never encounter, creating a psychological resilience that apparently extended to physical stress tolerance as well. The combination of real-world emergency experience and whatever natural capabilities I possessed created response patterns that continued to confound the Academy's evaluation protocols. The video scenarios escalated in complexity and emotional intensity, while the physical pressure climbed toward maximum levels. I found myself analyzing multi-victim accidents and complex medical emergencies with the same clear focus I'd demonstrated in earlier tests, providing detailed response protocols and resource allocation strategies, as if I was actually on scene rather than sitting in a testing chair with electrodes monitoring my stress responses. Dr. Chen's equipment registered pain levels that should have made concentration impossible, but my analytical thinking remained sharp and my emotional responses stayed controlled. The combination of physical stress and psychological pressure that typically overwhelmed even experienced professionals seemed to have little impact on my ability to process information and make complex decisions under extreme conditions. When the evaluation concluded, the room fell into the kind of silence that follows unexpected discoveries. Dr. Chen studied her data with the focused intensity of someone trying to understand results that didn't match any previous experience. Captain Rodriguez reviewed her notes with growing recognition that something unusual was happening. Thompson checked and rechecked his equipment readings, searching for technical explanations for what they'd all witnessed. "I need to make some phone calls," Rodriguez said finally, her tone carrying the weight of decisions that extended beyond routine academy business. Results like these require consultation with specialized personnel who deal with exceptional cases. The phrase exceptional cases hung in the air with obvious significance, suggesting that my afternoon volunteer session had evolved into something that warranted attention from levels of authority I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Chen continued analyzing her data, occasionally shaking her head in apparent disbelief at readings that challenged her professional understanding of human stress response patterns. As the specialized testing equipment was powered down and the room began returning to its normal configuration, I realized that my simple volunteer day had become something much more complex. The academy staff moved with the purposeful efficiency of people implementing protocols designed for unusual circumstances, their professional demeanor suggesting that my performance had triggered administrative processes typically reserved for exceptional situations. Thompson approached with a folder containing what appeared to be additional documentation, his expression carrying the kind of measured concern that suggested significant implications. "Ms. Martinez, I need to inform you that results like these typically require additional evaluation by specialized personnel. Captain Rodriguez is contacting our consulting experts who deal with cases that fall outside normal parameters." The recruits had long since moved on to other training activities, leaving me alone with academy personnel who were clearly trying to understand what they'd encountered. The casual atmosphere of volunteer assistance had been replaced by the focused attention typically directed towards subjects of official investigation, though everyone maintained professional courtesy throughout the process. Dr. Chen finished her data analysis and joined the group, bringing with her the kind of scientific conclusions that would drive whatever decisions came next. The stress tolerance levels we've measured today fall into ranges typically associated with genetic variations or extensive conditioning programs that most civilian populations never encounter. Combined with the cognitive enhancement under pressure, these results suggest capabilities that warrant further investigation. The scientific language was careful and neutral, but the implications were clear. My responses to their testing had been unusual enough to trigger protocols designed for exceptional cases. What had started as a simple volunteer opportunity to help train police recruits had evolved into something that was attracting attention from specialized personnel who dealt with human capabilities that fell outside normal statistical ranges. As the afternoon session concluded and the academy staff began making the phone calls that would determine what happened next, I found myself in the unusual position of being the subject of professional curiosity rather than simply a volunteer helper. The casual dynamics of the morning had given way to something more formal, more consequential, with implications that extended far beyond a single day of recruit evaluation assistance. The mountain air outside the academy building carried the same crisp clarity it had held all day, but the context of my presence there had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a routine volunteer opportunity had become something that was attracting attention from levels of authority I hadn't expected to encounter. And based on the serious expressions and urgent phone calls happening around me, my afternoon was far from over. Captain Rodriguez emerged from her office with the kind of determined expression that suggested important decisions had been made during her consultations with unnamed authorities. Dr. Chen gathered her equipment and data files with the methodical precision of someone preparing to present findings to higher levels of oversight. Thompson reviewed his documentation one final time, ensuring that every detail of the day's evaluations had been properly recorded for whatever review processes lay ahead. The late afternoon sun streamed through the gymnasium windows, casting long shadows across equipment that had just measured human capabilities in ways that apparently warranted special attention. And somewhere in the administrative offices of the academy, phone calls were being made to people whose job it was to understand what happened when routine evaluations produced results that fell far outside the boundaries of normal human experience. The phone call that changed everything came 20 minutes after Captain Rodriguez disappeared into her office. I was sitting in the academy's reception area, supposedly waiting for final paperwork processing, when I heard her voice through the partially open door carry a tone of urgency that hadn't been present in any of our earlier interactions. "Yes, sir, I understand the sensitivity," she was saying, her words careful and measured. "But I'm telling you, the response patterns we documented today fall into categories that require immediate consultation. Dr. Chen's preliminary analysis shows stress tolerance levels that exceed anything in our database." There was a pause, presumably while someone on the other end of the call responded. Then Rodriguez continued with increased intensity. "No, sir, this isn't about recruitment potential. The physiological markers we recorded today match profiles that are classified above my clearance level. I need someone from the specialized assessment team to review these results." I pretended to read the safety brochures scattered on the coffee table while processing the implications of what I was overhearing. Rodriguez was clearly speaking with someone in authority, and the conversation suggested that my test results had triggered protocols designed for circumstances that went far beyond routine academy evaluations. The phrase "classified above my clearance level" carried particular weight, implying that whatever patterns they'd identified in my responses connected to information that most academy personnel weren't authorized to access. Dr. Chen emerged from a nearby office carrying a thick folder and tablet computer, her expression showing the kind of focused concentration that followed significant discoveries. She noticed me in the reception area and approached with the careful steps of someone who had spent the last hour analyzing data that didn't fit established models. "Rebecca," she said, settling into the chair across from me with the folder balanced on her lap, "I've been reviewing the complete dataset from today's evaluations, and I need to ask you some additional questions about your background." Her tone was professionally neutral, but there was an undercurrent of scientific fascination that suggested she was dealing with information that challenged her understanding of human stress response patterns. The folder in her lap was thicker than anything that should have been generated by a single day of testing, implying that my results had prompted extensive research into comparative data and historical precedents. "What kind of additional questions?" I asked, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had carried me through the day's evaluations. Dr. Chen opened her tablet and consulted what appeared to be a complex chart filled with numerical data and statistical comparisons. "The pain tolerance levels we measured today fall into the 99th percentile of human capability, but your cognitive enhancement under extreme stress is completely unprecedented in civilian populations. These response patterns are typically associated with very specific types of conditioning or genetic variations that are extensively documented in specialized literature." She paused, studying my face with the analytical gaze of someone trained to read human reactions for signs of deception or concealment. "I need to ask directly. Have you ever participated in any government research programs, medical studies, or specialized training initiatives that might not be reflected in your standard employment records?" The question was carefully phrased to avoid accusations while probing for information that might explain results that clearly fell outside her normal experience. I realized that my afternoon had evolved into something approaching an official investigation, with trained professionals trying to understand how a civilian volunteer had produced data that apparently matched classified profiles. "No government programs or medical studies beyond standard EMT certification requirements," I replied honestly. "My background is exactly what's documented in my volunteer application." Dr. Chen made notes on her tablet, but her expression suggested that my answer didn't resolve the questions raised by her data analysis. She consulted her folder again, pulling out printed charts that showed statistical comparisons and response pattern analysis that had clearly required significant research to compile. "The physiological markers we documented today match very specific profiles that appear in specialized literature," she continued, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone discussing sensitive information. "Pain tolerance combined with cognitive enhancement under stress is a rare combination that's been extensively studied in certain populations, but those studies are typically classified at levels that restrict access to authorized personnel." Before I could respond, Captain Rodriguez emerged from her office with a determined expression of someone who had just received important instructions from higher authority. She carried a secure phone and a folder marked with classification stamps that hadn't been present in any of our earlier interactions. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her tone carrying new formality that suggested our relationship had shifted from routine volunteer coordination to something more official. I've been in contact with specialized personnel who review cases involving exceptional human performance characteristics. They're requesting immediate consultation regarding your evaluation results. The phrase specialized personnel carried obvious weight, implying that my test results had attracted attention from individuals whose job it was to understand human capabilities that fell outside normal statistical ranges. Dr. Chen closed her folder and tablet, gathering her materials with the purposeful efficiency of someone preparing to transfer responsibility to higher authorities. "What kind of consultation?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that my simple volunteer day had triggered administrative processes designed for circumstances far more complex than routine academy assistance. Rodriguez consulted her secure phone, reading information that had clearly been transmitted during her recent conversations with unnamed authorities. "There's a specialized assessment team that deals with individuals whose capabilities fall into ranges that require additional evaluation. They're requesting permission to conduct follow-up interviews and extended testing protocols." The language was carefully bureaucratic, but the implications were clear. My performance had been unusual enough to warrant attention from specialists who dealt with exceptional cases. What had started as volunteer assistance for police recruit training had evolved into something that was attracting scrutiny from levels of authority I hadn't anticipated encountering. Dr. Chen stood and gathered her materials, preparing to transfer her research to whatever specialized personnel were being brought into the situation. "The data we collected today will need to be reviewed by experts who have access to comparative databases that aren't available at the academy level," she explained. "Your response patterns match profiles that require analysis by individuals with specialized clearances." As she spoke, I noticed other academy staff members moving through the building with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested unusual protocols were being implemented. Phone calls were being made in offices throughout the facility, and personnel who hadn't been involved in the day's evaluations were suddenly appearing with folders and official documentation. Sergeant Thompson appeared from the direction of the gymnasium, carrying equipment cases and accompanied by two individuals I hadn't seen earlier. Both were dressed in civilian clothes but carried themselves with the bearing of people accustomed to official authority. Their presence suggested that my evaluation results had prompted the involvement of personnel from outside the normal academy structure. "Ms. Martinez," Thompson said, his tone carrying the kind of measured respect that suggested he'd been briefed on developments that had occurred while I was waiting in the reception area. "These gentlemen are from the State Specialized Assessment Division. They'd like to discuss your testing results and explore some additional evaluation possibilities." The older of the two men stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with exceptional circumstances. He was tall and lean with graying hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested extensive experience in evaluating human capabilities under unusual conditions. His partner was younger, probably in his 30s, with the alert demeanor of someone trained in technical analysis and data interpretation. "Ms. Martinez," the older man said, extending his hand with professional courtesy. "I'm Director Michael Harrison from the Colorado State Assessment Division. This is my colleague, Dr. James Liu, our Senior Physiological Analyst. We understand you've had quite an interesting day at the Academy." His tone was friendly, but carried the undercurrent of authority that came with specialized government positions. Dr. Liu carried a tablet computer and what appeared to be portable monitoring equipment, suggesting that their visit wasn't simply administrative, but involved additional technical evaluation capabilities. "We've reviewed the preliminary data from today's testing," Director Harrison continued, consulting a folder that had clearly been transmitted electronically during their travel time to the Academy. "Your response patterns have raised some questions that require consultation with personnel who deal with exceptional human performance characteristics." The phrase "exceptional human performance characteristics" was carefully neutral, but it carried implications that extended far beyond routine academy volunteer evaluations. I was beginning to understand that my afternoon had attracted attention from specialists whose job it was to identify and evaluate individuals whose capabilities fell into ranges that warranted official investigation. Dr. Liu activated his tablet and portable equipment, preparing to conduct what appeared to be additional monitoring, while Director Harrison continued his explanation of their involvement. "The state maintains protocols for evaluating individuals whose physiological responses fall outside normal statistical parameters," he said. "Your test results today triggered those protocols." Captain Rodriguez joined our conversation, bringing with her the documentation that had been generated throughout the day's evaluations. Director Harrison has clearance to review the complete dataset from today's testing, she explained. His division deals with cases that require specialized analysis beyond what we can provide at the academy level. I realized that my simple volunteer opportunity had become the center of an official investigation involving multiple levels of authority and specialized personnel whose normal duties apparently involved evaluating exceptional cases. The casual atmosphere of morning recruit assistance had given way to something that resembled a scientific research study combined with a government assessment protocol. What exactly does this specialized analysis involve? I asked, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had carried me through the day's unexpected developments. Director Harrison consulted his folder again, reviewing information that had clearly been compiled from multiple sources during the time since my test results had first attracted attention. We need to conduct some additional evaluations to better understand the physiological mechanisms behind your stress response patterns, he explained. The data collected today shows characteristics that appear in very specific populations, and we need to determine whether additional factors might be involved. Dr. Liu had finished setting up his portable equipment and was reviewing what appeared to be comparative data on his tablet computer. The pain tolerance levels documented today fall into ranges that are typically associated with genetic variations or specialized conditioning programs, he said, his tone carrying the careful precision of someone trained in technical analysis. We need to rule out various possibilities to properly categorize your response patterns. The scientific language was neutral, but I could sense the underlying curiosity that drove researchers when they encountered data that didn't fit established models. My afternoon volunteer session had apparently produced results that challenged their understanding of normal human capabilities, triggering protocols designed for exceptional circumstances. Thompson approached with additional documentation, including what appeared to be consent forms for expanded testing procedures. Ms. Martinez, the State Assessment Division would like to conduct some follow-up evaluations. With your permission, he said. These would involve more sophisticated monitoring equipment and protocols that aren't available at the academy level. I found myself in the position of agreeing to expanded testing that would apparently help answer questions about capabilities I'd never fully understood myself. The day had evolved from simple volunteer assistance to becoming the subject of official investigation by specialists whose job it was to evaluate exceptional human performance characteristics. Director Harrison activated a secure communication device and consulted with what appeared to be additional authorities regarding the next steps in their evaluation process. Dr. Liu prepared his monitoring equipment with the methodical precision of someone who had conducted similar assessments under circumstances that required official documentation and specialized protocols. The additional testing would help us understand whether your response patterns are related to genetic factors, conditioning effects, or other variables that require specific classification, Director Harrison explained after completing his consultation. This information would be valuable for both scientific research and potential applications in various professional fields. The implications were clear. My test results had attracted attention from specialists who dealt with human capabilities that might have applications beyond civilian volunteer work. What had started as a simple day of helping train police recruits had evolved into something that was being evaluated by government personnel whose job it was to identify and understand exceptional human performance characteristics. Captain Rodriguez reviewed the documentation one final time, ensuring that all protocols had been properly followed throughout the day's unexpected developments. Dr. Chen gathered her research materials, preparing to transfer her findings to the specialized personnel who would conduct the expanded analysis that my results apparently warranted. As the afternoon sun streamed through the academy windows, casting long shadows across a reception area that had become the center of an official investigation, I realized that my volunteer day had fundamentally changed the trajectory of whatever came next. The casual decision to help with recruit evaluations had produced results that were now being analyzed by specialists whose normal duties involved evaluating exceptional cases for reasons that extended far beyond routine academy training assistance. Dr. Liu activated his portable monitoring equipment and consulted his tablet computer, preparing to conduct additional assessments that would apparently help answer questions about physiological capabilities that had attracted official attention from multiple levels of specialized authority. Director Harrison reviewed his documentation one final time, ensuring that all protocols were properly implemented for what had clearly become an exceptional case, requiring specialized evaluation procedures. The late afternoon atmosphere in the academy had shifted from routine training operations to something resembling a research facility. where important discoveries were being processed by experts whose job it was to understand human capabilities that fell outside normal statistical parameters. And at the center of it all was a woman who had simply volunteered to help train police recruits and ended up becoming the subject of official investigation by specialists who dealt with exceptional human performance characteristics that apparently warranted attention from levels of authority far beyond anything she had anticipated when she drove through the academy gates that morning. The phone calls continued in offices throughout the building, involving personnel whose clearance levels and specialized knowledge were apparently required to properly evaluate and classify the results that had been generated by what should have been a routine volunteer assistance opportunity. And based on the serious expressions and urgent consultations happening around me, the day's discoveries were going to have implications that extended far beyond the boundaries of a single afternoon at a police training academy in Colorado. The breakthrough came when Dr. Liu connected his specialized equipment to databases that existed far beyond the academy's standard resources. I watched his expression shift from professional curiosity to something approaching amazement as information populated his screen. Data that had clearly been pulled from sources requiring security clearances that most academy personnel didn't possess. Director Harrison leaned over his shoulder, reading the results with the kind of focused intensity that suggested they were looking at information that changed everything. "This is impossible," Dr. Liu said quietly, his voice carrying the stunned tone of someone encountering data that challenged fundamental assumptions. "The genetic markers we're reading here match profiles that are supposed to be theoretical. These are laboratory projections, not naturally occurring human variations." Harrison straightened slowly, his professional composure struggling with whatever information was appearing on Liu's screen. He activated his secure communication device with the deliberate movements of someone who needed to report discoveries that would require immediate attention from levels of authority far above his own. "Control, this is Harrison at Riverside Academy," he said into the device, his voice carrying new urgency. "I need immediate consultation with the Denver Genetic Research Division. We have positive identification on markers that match Project Prometheus baseline profiles." The phrase Project Prometheus hung in the air with obvious significance, though its meaning wasn't immediately clear to me. What was clear was that whatever Dr. Liu's equipment had detected in my physiological patterns had triggered recognition of something that warranted urgent consultation with specialized research facilities. Captain Rodriguez had been listening to the conversation with growing concern, her expression shifting from routine cooperation to something approaching alarm. "Director Harrison," she said carefully, "what exactly are we dealing with here? My academy personnel aren't cleared for discussions involving classified research projects." Harrison completed his secure communication and turned to address the group with the kind of measured authority that suggested he was implementing protocols designed for exceptional circumstances. "Captain, I need you to clear this area of all non-essential personnel immediately. What we're dealing with here requires security measures that extend beyond standard academy operations." The immediate response was swift and efficient. Academy staff who had been lingering in the reception area dispersed quickly, leaving only the core group of officials who had been directly involved in the day's evaluations. Thompson secured the building's entrances while Rodriguez activated communication protocols that suggested the academy was implementing security measures typically reserved for official investigations. Dr. Liu continued analyzing his data, occasionally shaking his head in apparent disbelief at information that clearly challenged his professional understanding of human genetic variation. "The metabolic efficiency markers are off the charts," he said, consulting additional screens that displayed complex biological data. "Pain receptor sensitivity shows adaptive modifications that shouldn't exist in natural populations. This is laboratory-grade genetic optimization." Harrison received a response through his secure device and listened with the kind of concentrated attention that suggested critical information was being transmitted from higher authorities. When the communication ended, he approached me with an expression that combined professional respect with something approaching awe. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his tone carrying new weight that suggested our relationship had fundamentally shifted. "I've just received authorization to share information that's typically classified above my normal clearance level. What we've discovered today requires immediate consultation with personnel who deal with genetic research programs that most people aren't aware exist." The implications were staggering, though I was still struggling to understand exactly what his equipment had detected that warranted such dramatic security measures. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing the technological analysis, stepped forward with her own tablet displaying comparative data that she'd apparently been analyzing throughout the afternoon. "Rebecca," she said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone delivering information that would change everything. The pain tolerance levels we measured today aren't just exceptional. They're impossible according to normal human physiology. Your nervous system appears to have been modified at the genetic level to process pain signals in ways that don't occur naturally. The word modified carried enormous implications, suggesting that my capabilities weren't simply the result of training or natural variation, but represented something that had been deliberately altered through processes that most people never encountered. Dr. Liu's equipment continued generating data that apparently supported conclusions that challenged basic assumptions about human biological limitations. Harrison activated his secure communication device again, this time speaking with someone whose authority clearly extended far beyond state-level assessment divisions. "Sir, we have confirmed positive identification on genetic markers that match Denver Research Facility profiles from the early 2000s. The subject appears to be a surviving participant from experimental programs that were classified above current public knowledge." As he spoke, I felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in ways that connected to memories I'd never fully understood. The early 2000s had encompassed my childhood years, a period that included medical treatments and hospital visits that my parents had always described as routine childhood health care. But the specific dates Harrison was referencing aligned with a series of medical procedures that had seemed unusually complex for standard pediatric care. Dr. Liu's analysis continued revealing information that painted an increasingly clear picture of genetic modifications that extended far beyond natural human variation. Accelerated tissue healing, enhanced stress hormone regulation, modified pain receptor sensitivity, optimized metabolic efficiency, he read from his screen. These are characteristics that were theoretically possible through genetic modification programs, but were never supposed to have been implemented in human subjects. The revelation hit me with the force of understanding years of experiences that had never quite made sense. Childhood medical treatments that had seemed excessive for routine health care. Recovery times from injuries that had consistently surprised medical professionals. Physical capabilities that had always felt natural to me but apparently struck others as exceptional. And most significantly, the ability to maintain cognitive function under extreme stress that had allowed me to excel in emergency medical work but had never felt like anything more than natural response patterns. Harrison completed his communication and returned to our group with the kind of authoritative bearing that suggested he'd received instructions from levels of command that most people never encountered. "Ms. Martinez, I've been authorized to inform you that you appear to be a participant in genetic research programs that were conducted during your childhood as part of classified medical initiatives." The words hung in the air with life-changing implications. Dr. Chen consulted her tablet again, pulling up historical research data that apparently provided context for the discoveries that Dr. Liu's equipment had made. Project Prometheus was a classified genetic modification program conducted on pediatric subjects during the early 2000s, she explained. The goal was to enhance human physiological capabilities for potential applications in emergency response and extreme stress situations. The connection to my career in emergency medical services suddenly made perfect sense. My natural aptitude for maintaining composure under extreme stress, my ability to function effectively in crisis situations that overwhelmed other people, and most significantly, my extraordinary pain tolerance hadn't been natural traits but the result of genetic modifications implemented during childhood medical procedures that I'd never understood. Harrison activated additional security protocols, ensuring that the building was properly secured for discussions involving classified research information. "The genetic modifications you received as a child were part of an experimental program designed to create individuals capable of functioning effectively under conditions that would incapacitate normal human subjects," he explained. "Your pain tolerance levels today demonstrated that those modifications were successful beyond the researchers' most optimistic projections." Dr. Liu's equipment continued generating data that apparently provided detailed analysis of genetic modifications that had been implemented decades earlier. The pain receptor modifications show adaptive improvements that suggest the genetic changes evolved and optimized themselves over time, he said, his voice carrying amazement at discovering biological processes that challenged current scientific understanding. This is evolutionary-level adaptation happening within a single human lifetime. The Academy building had taken on the atmosphere of a research facility, where major discoveries were being processed by experts whose normal duties involved analyzing exceptional cases for reasons that extended far beyond routine evaluation protocols. Thompson coordinated with building security to ensure that our discussions remained confidential, while Rodriguez documented everything for reports that would apparently be submitted to authorities whose clearance levels exceeded normal academy operations. As the full scope of the discovery became clear, I realized that my volunteer day had revealed information about myself that explained years of experiences and capabilities that had never quite made sense. The exceptional performance that had attracted attention from specialized personnel wasn't the result of training or natural ability, but represented the successful implementation of genetic modifications that had been conducted during childhood as part of classified research programs. Director Harrison received another secure communication, this time from sources whose authority apparently extended to the highest levels of government research operations. When the conversation concluded, he approached me with an expression that combined professional respect with recognition of someone whose capabilities represented significant scientific achievements. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his tone carrying new formality that reflected the magnitude of what had been discovered, "I've just received authorization from the Denver Research Facility to inform you that you are considered one of the most successful subjects from the Prometheus program. Your genetic modifications have not only remained stable over decades, but have continued to evolve and improve beyond the original research parameters." The implications were staggering, though I was still processing the reality that my entire life had been shaped by genetic modifications that I'd never known existed. Dr. Chen approached with additional historical documentation that provided context for the research programs that had apparently determined much of my physiological development. The Prometheus program was discontinued in 2003 due to ethical concerns and political pressure, she explained, consulting files that had clearly been transmitted from classified databases. Most subjects showed minimal long-term effects from the genetic modifications, but a small percentage demonstrated exceptional results that exceeded all research projections. Dr. Liu's analysis had shifted to long-term monitoring protocols, tracking genetic markers that apparently indicated how the modifications had evolved over time. The adaptive improvements we're seeing suggest that the genetic changes implemented during childhood have continued developing throughout your life, he said. Your current capabilities represent optimization that the original researchers never anticipated achieving. As afternoon shadows lengthened through the academy windows, the full scope of the discovery continued expanding through secure communications with research facilities whose existence had been unknown to most of the people involved in the day's evaluations. Thompson coordinated building security while Rodriguez prepared documentation for reports that would be submitted to authorities whose responsibility included monitoring the long-term effects of classified genetic research programs. Harrison activated his secure device for what appeared to be a final consultation with authorities whose clearance levels exceeded his own. When the communication concluded, he returned to our group with the kind of authoritative bearing that suggested critical decisions had been made regarding how to proceed with the information that had been discovered. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority combined with personal respect, "I've been instructed to inform you that your exceptional performance today has been classified as a national scientific asset. The genetic modifications you received as a child represent research achievements that have significant implications for multiple fields of human enhancement and emergency response applications." The phrase, national scientific asset, carried implications that extended far beyond anything I had anticipated when I'd volunteered for recruit evaluation assistance. What had started as a simple day of helping train police officers had evolved into the discovery that my entire life had been shaped by classified genetic research programs, whose success had exceeded the most optimistic projections of government scientists. Dr. Chen gathered her research materials, preparing to transfer her findings to specialized personnel whose responsibility included monitoring and analyzing the long-term effects of experimental genetic modification programs. "Your case will require ongoing evaluation by researchers who specialize in genetic optimization outcomes," she explained. "The data we've collected today represents some of the most significant findings in human enhancement research." As the secure communications continued, and additional personnel arrived to document what had clearly become a major scientific discovery, I realized that my volunteer afternoon had fundamentally changed my understanding of who I was and why I possessed capabilities that had always seemed natural, but apparently represented cutting-edge achievements in genetic modification research. The Academy building had become the center of activities involving multiple levels of government research facilities whose normal operations remained hidden from public knowledge. Thompson coordinated with federal security personnel who had apparently been dispatched to ensure proper handling of information that had significant implications for classified research programs. Rodriguez completed her documentation and submitted reports to authorities whose responsibility included tracking the outcomes of genetic research programs that most people never knew existed. The casual atmosphere of recruit training assistants had given way to something resembling a classified research operation where major discoveries were being processed by experts whose security clearances extended to the highest levels of government scientific programs. Harrison received final authorization from sources whose authority apparently included decision-making regarding how to handle discoveries that had significant implications for national research initiatives. When his secure communications concluded, he approached me with the kind of respect typically reserved for individuals whose capabilities represented significant scientific achievements. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his tone carrying the full weight of official recognition. "You are hereby classified as a successful outcome of genetic research programs that represent some of the most advanced human enhancement achievements in recorded scientific history. Your capabilities today demonstrated that genetic modifications implemented during childhood can produce results that exceed the most optimistic projections of government research programs." The recognition was both overwhelming and vindicating, explaining years of experiences and capabilities that had shaped my life in ways I'd never fully understood. What had started as a simple volunteer opportunity had become the revelation that my extraordinary pain tolerance and stress management abilities represented the successful implementation of genetic modifications that had been considered theoretical possibilities when they were first attempted decades earlier. As evening approached and the Academy prepared to conclude what had become a landmark day in genetic research documentation, I realized that my understanding of myself had been fundamentally transformed by discoveries that connected my personal capabilities to classified government programs whose existence had been hidden from public knowledge for decades. The volunteer afternoon that had attracted attention from specialized personnel had revealed that my exceptional performance represented achievements in human genetic modification that had significant implications for scientific research and practical applications that extended far beyond anything I had ever imagined. 3 months later, I found myself back at the Riverside Academy, but this time my role had fundamentally changed. The morning air carried the same crisp mountain clarity, but I was no longer a volunteer subject for evaluation. Instead, I stood before a new class of recruits as their specialized resilience instructor, officially designated as a consultant for the Academy's Enhanced Stress Training Program. Director Harrison had spent weeks working with federal authorities to establish protocols that would allow my unique capabilities to benefit law enforcement training while maintaining the security classifications that surrounded my background. The recruits gathered in the gymnasium looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism that I remembered from my own early days in emergency services. They saw a woman in her late 20s wearing standard Academy training attire, nothing that suggested extraordinary capabilities or classified genetic modifications. To them, I probably appeared to be just another instructor brought in to share techniques they could learn from textbooks or online training modules. Ashley Chen, a recruit in her early 20s with the eager determination of someone beginning a career in public service, raised her hand during the introductory session. "Ma'am, what makes your training different from the standard stress management courses we've already completed?" Her question carried the polite skepticism of someone who had already been subjected to multiple instructors, promising revolutionary approaches to handling pressure and adversity. I smiled, recognizing the same questioning attitude I'd maintained throughout my own training experiences. "Ashley, stress management courses teach you techniques for coping with difficult situations. What we're going to explore together is how to discover capabilities you don't know you possess, how to function when coping strategies aren't enough, and you need to access reserves that most people never realize exist." The distinction was important because it reflected the fundamental difference between conventional training approaches and what my own experience had taught me about human potential under extreme conditions. Standard stress management focused on maintaining baseline function during challenging circumstances. What I'd learned through my genetic modifications and years of emergency response work was that human beings could access levels of performance that transcended normal limitations when properly understood and developed. Dr. Liu had remained involved as a consulting researcher, helping to develop training protocols that could safely push recruits toward discovering their own enhanced capabilities without requiring the genetic modifications that had shaped my development. His equipment monitored physiological responses during exercises designed to gradually expand pain tolerance and stress resilience through controlled exposure and progressive conditioning. Today we're going to begin with baseline assessments, I explained to the assembled group. But these aren't evaluations designed to measure your current limitations. They're explorations designed to help you discover capabilities that exist beyond what you currently believe about your own potential. The philosophical approach was deliberately different from traditional academy training methods, which typically focused on identifying weaknesses to be corrected rather than hidden strengths to be developed. My own experience had taught me that extraordinary capabilities often remained dormant until circumstances demanded their activation, and that the right training environment could help people access reserves they never knew existed. Marcus Thompson, a recruit with military background, who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to physical challenges, stepped forward with the kind of determined expression that suggested he was ready to test whatever theories I was proposing. "Ma'am, I've been through Marine Corps training and civilian emergency response programs. What exactly are we going to discover that those experiences didn't already reveal?" His question reflected the healthy skepticism of someone whose previous training had been comprehensive and demanding. I appreciated his directness because it gave me an opportunity to explain the fundamental difference between pushing against known limitations and discovering capabilities that existed beyond current understanding. Marcus, military training and emergency response programs are designed to optimize performance within established parameters, I replied. They teach you to function effectively under stress by managing your responses to difficult situations. What we're exploring is how to access performance levels that exist beyond those parameters, capabilities that emerge when conventional training approaches aren't sufficient. To demonstrate the concept, I moved to the pressure point apparatus that had been permanently installed for the Academy's enhanced training program. The equipment was similar to what Dr. Liu had used during my original evaluation, but it had been modified with additional safety protocols and monitoring systems that allowed for progressive training rather than maximum stress testing. Pain tolerance isn't about learning to ignore discomfort, I explained as I positioned myself in the device. It's about understanding that pain is information, and that your response to that information can be trained and optimized just like any other skill. As the pressure began building, I maintained normal conversation while monitoring displays showed increasing stress levels that would typically cause significant distress in untrained subjects. The recruits watched with growing amazement as the pressure climbed through levels that had challenged experienced officers during their evaluations. But rather than demonstrating gritted teeth endurance or forced composure, I showed them how conscious breathing and mental focus could transform the pain experience into simply another form of sensory input that could be processed without triggering panic or performance degradation. "Notice that I'm not fighting the sensation," I continued, as the equipment reached levels that would be unbearable for most people. "I'm not trying to block it out or pretend it doesn't exist. Instead, I'm processing the information it provides while maintaining focus on more important priorities, like our conversation and your learning objectives." Ashley raised her hand again, her expression showing the kind of fascination that suggested she was beginning to understand that conventional approaches to stress management might be fundamentally limited. "How is it possible to maintain normal function when the pain level should be overwhelming your nervous system?" Her question touched on the core of what made my genetic modification significant, but it also highlighted principles that could be applied by anyone willing to explore the boundaries of their current capabilities. "Ashley, your nervous system is designed to prioritize survival above all other functions. When it perceives threats, it automatically diverts resources away from complex thinking and toward basic survival responses. But those threat responses can be retrained through progressive exposure and conscious conditioning." As I spoke, Dr. Liu monitored my physiological responses on equipment that displayed the kinds of stress markers that had initially confused Academy personnel during my volunteer evaluation. The readings showed pain levels that should have been incapacitating, but my heart rate remained steady, my cognitive function stayed sharp, and my stress hormones maintained levels that indicated optimal performance rather than crisis response. When the demonstration concluded and the pressure equipment powered down, I moved immediately into leading the recruits through their own introductory exercises. These began with simple breathing techniques and progressive muscle relaxation, foundational skills that would prepare them for more advanced training as their capabilities developed over the coming weeks. "The goal isn't to match what you just witnessed," I explained as the recruits settled into their own training positions. "The goal is to discover capabilities that exist within your own potential, but haven't been activated by previous experiences. Everyone's genetic foundation is different, but everyone also has reserves that remain untapped until the right training conditions access them. Marcus approached the basic pressure apparatus with the kind of determined focus that suggested he was ready to test whatever principles I was teaching. As the equipment began applying controlled stress to pressure points on his arm, I guided him through breathing techniques designed to maintain cognitive function while processing increasing levels of discomfort. "Don't fight the sensation, Marcus," I coached as his jaw began tightening with concentration. "Let it exist while you focus on maintaining conversation with me. Tell me about your most challenging military experience and how you maintained function under those conditions." As he began describing a combat situation where he'd been required to perform complex technical procedures while under enemy fire, his response to the pressure apparatus began shifting from resistance to accommodation. The physical stress remained constant, but his ability to process it while maintaining cognitive focus improved dramatically as he connected current training to previous experiences where he'd already demonstrated exceptional capabilities. "Excellent," I said as his performance stabilized at pressure levels that would have been impossible when he'd first entered the device. "You've just demonstrated that capabilities you developed during military service can be expanded and applied to new stress categories through conscious training and proper conditioning." Ashley volunteered for the next demonstration, approaching the equipment with nervous determination that reminded me of my own early experiences discovering capabilities I hadn't known existed. As she settled into the training apparatus, I guided her through the same progressive techniques that had helped Marcus, but adapted to her different background and personal stress response patterns. "Ashley, think about a time when you had to maintain composure during a family emergency or personal crisis," I suggested as the pressure began building. "Remember how you were able to function effectively despite emotional stress that could have been overwhelming. We're going to apply those same mental processes to physical stress conditioning." Her response patterns were different from Marcus's military-trained approaches, but equally effective once she connected the training principles to experiences where she'd already demonstrated resilience under pressure. Within minutes, she was maintaining normal conversation while processing stress levels that had initially seemed impossible for someone with no specialized background. Over the following weeks, the enhanced training program continued developing each recruit's individual capabilities through progressively challenging exercises designed to expand their understanding of personal potential. Dr. Liu's monitoring equipment tracked their physiological adaptations, documenting improvements in stress tolerance and cognitive function that exceeded the results achieved through conventional academy training methods. The breakthrough moment came during the 6th week of training, when the entire class participated in a comprehensive stress simulation that combined physical pressure, psychological challenges, and complex decision-making requirements under extreme time constraints. The scenario involved coordinating emergency response activities while subjected to pain stimulation, sensory overload, and information processing demands that would typically overwhelm normal human performance capabilities. Marcus emerged from the simulation with performance scores that rivaled those achieved by veteran officers with years of field experience. Ashley demonstrated cognitive flexibility under stress that exceeded baseline measurements by margins that impressed Dr. Liu and his research team. Every recruit in the class showed improvements that suggested they had accessed capabilities that hadn't been apparent during their initial academy evaluations. But the most significant moment came when Ashley approached me after the final training session, her expression showing the kind of profound understanding that follows genuine personal transformation. "Rebecca," she said, using my first name for the first time since training had begun, "what you've taught us isn't really about pain tolerance or stress management, is it? It's about discovering that we're capable of more than we ever believed possible." Her insight captured the essential lesson that had emerged from weeks of progressive training and individual capability development. The technical skills were important, but the fundamental transformation involved recognizing that human potential extended far beyond the limitations most people accepted as permanent boundaries. "Ashley, you've discovered something that most people never realize," I replied, settling onto the gymnasium steps where we could talk without the formality of instructor-student roles. "Every person has reserves of strength, resilience, and capability that remain hidden until circumstances or training access them. What we've done together is create controlled circumstances that allowed you to discover what was already there." She nodded thoughtfully, processing implications that extended far beyond police academy training. It makes me wonder what other capabilities people possess that never get developed because they don't encounter the right training conditions or challenging circumstances. Her question touched on philosophical issues that had fascinated researchers since the first genetic modification programs had been conceived. If enhanced capabilities could be accessed through training alone, what did that suggest about the untapped potential that existed in normal human populations? And what responsibilities came with understanding that most people never discovered their own extraordinary capabilities? The truth is, Ashley, most people live their entire lives without accessing more than a fraction of their actual potential, I explained. They accept limitations that feel permanent, but are actually just the boundaries of their current experience. What you've learned here is that those boundaries can be expanded through conscious effort and proper training conditions. Marcus joined our conversation, bringing with him the perspective of someone whose military background had already exposed him to training designed to push human capabilities beyond civilian norms. The difference is that most training focuses on performing within known limitations, he said. What Rebecca taught us is how to discover capabilities that exist beyond those limitations. Their understanding represented the successful transmission of lessons that went far deeper than specific techniques for managing stress or tolerating pain. They had learned to recognize that human potential was fundamentally more expansive than most people ever realized, and that the right training approaches could access capabilities that remained dormant under normal circumstances. Dr. Liu approached our group with data tablets showing the comprehensive results from 6 weeks of enhanced training protocols. The physiological improvements we've documented in this class exceed anything achieved through conventional academy training methods, he reported. Every participant has demonstrated stress tolerance levels that fall into ranges typically associated with specialized military or emergency response veterans. The scientific validation was satisfying, but the real measure of success was visible in the confidence and capability that each recruit now carried. They moved with the assurance of people who had discovered inner resources they could depend on during challenging situations. They spoke with the calm authority of individuals who understood that their responses to adversity could be controlled and optimized through conscious choice and proper preparation. As the enhanced training program concluded and the recruits prepared to graduate into active law enforcement service, I realized that my own journey from volunteer evaluation subject to specialized instructor had taught me lessons that extended far beyond my genetic modifications or exceptional capabilities. The most important discovery had been that extraordinary potential existed in normal human populations, waiting to be accessed through the right training conditions and proper understanding of human psychological and physiological adaptability. Captain Rodriguez joined our final gathering, bringing with her the perspective of someone who had witnessed the entire transformation from initial volunteer evaluation to successful program implementation. "Ms. Martinez," she said, using the formal address that acknowledged my official role as Academy consultant. "The capabilities your recruits have developed represent some of the most significant advances in law enforcement training that we've documented in decades." Her recognition was professionally satisfying, but it also highlighted the broader implications of discovering that enhanced human capabilities could be developed through training rather than requiring genetic modifications. If normal recruits could achieve performance levels that exceeded veteran officers through proper conditioning, what did that suggest about the untapped potential that existed throughout society? Ashley approached for a final conversation before graduation, her expression showing the kind of mature understanding that follows genuine personal growth. "Rebecca, I know I can't ask about the details of your background or how you developed your own capabilities," she said carefully, "but I want you to know that what you've taught us will influence how I approach every challenge for the rest of my career." Her words captured the essential purpose that had driven my decision to transition from emergency medical services to training law enforcement recruits. The genetic modifications that had shaped my own development were unique and couldn't be replicated, but the lessons about human potential and capability development could be shared with anyone willing to explore the boundaries of their current limitations. "Ashley, the most important thing you can remember is that what you've accomplished here isn't the end of your development," I replied. "The capabilities you've discovered are starting points, not final destinations. Every challenging situation you encounter in your career will be an opportunity to access even deeper reserves of strength and resilience." As the recruits dispersed to begin their law enforcement careers, carrying with them enhanced capabilities and expanded understanding of human potential, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me from volunteer evaluation subject to specialized instructor. The genetic modifications that had initially seemed like unique advantages had become tools for helping others discover their own extraordinary capabilities through training and conscious development. Dr. Liu packed his monitoring equipment with the satisfaction of a researcher who had documented significant advances in human performance training. Director Harrison completed his final reports to federal authorities, documenting the successful implementation of enhanced training protocols that could be replicated at law enforcement academies throughout the country. The afternoon sun streamed through the gymnasium windows, casting familiar shadows across equipment that had been used to push human capabilities beyond conventional limitations. But the real transformation had occurred in the individuals who had discovered that their potential extended far beyond what they had previously believed possible. Standing in the academy parking lot as the last recruits drove away to begin their careers, I realized that my own story was really about something much larger than genetic modifications or exceptional pain tolerance. It was about the hidden strength that exists within every person, waiting to be discovered when the right circumstances or training conditions access capabilities that most people never know they possess. The mountain peaks rose against the afternoon sky with the same unchanging majesty they had displayed during my first volunteer visit months earlier. But everything else had fundamentally changed through the discovery that extraordinary capabilities could be developed, shared, and transmitted to others through understanding and proper training rather than requiring unique genetic advantages. Tomorrow would bring new recruits, new opportunities to help people discover their own hidden reserves of strength and resilience. The enhanced training program had proven that human potential was far more expansive than conventional wisdom suggested, and that the right approach could access capabilities that transformed not just individual performance but entire understanding of what people could accomplish when they stopped accepting limitations as permanent boundaries. The drive home through Colorado mountain roads carried the satisfaction of knowing that Ashley, Marcus, and their classmates would face their law enforcement careers with capabilities they had never imagined possessing. They had learned that strength wasn't about avoiding difficulty, but about discovering inner resources that could transform any challenge into an opportunity for accessing deeper levels of resilience and capability. Most people walk through life never realizing the extraordinary potential that exists within them, accepting limitations that feel permanent but are actually just the boundaries of their current experience. But sometimes, under the right circumstances and with proper guidance, individuals discover that they are capable of far more than they ever believed possible. And when that discovery happens, it changes not just their own lives but the lives of everyone they encounter, who might also be ready to explore the hidden strength that exists within human potential. The enhanced training program would continue, helping future recruits discover their own extraordinary capabilities through progressive conditioning and conscious development. And somewhere in police departments across Colorado, officers would face challenging situations with capabilities they had developed through understanding that human potential was fundamentally more expansive than most people ever realized. That understanding, more than any genetic modification or exceptional ability, represented the real gift that could be shared with anyone willing to explore the boundaries of their current limitations and discover the hidden strength that exists within every human being who chooses to access it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.